Just want to respond to an Adam something community post. They're like 10-minute videos about transport and infrastructure YouTuber guy who apparently is also incredibly into running interference for US imperialism. Let's check this out. But there's a very interesting part of this that I wanted to address because it's just sort of self-evidently wrong. So he said, it is possible to be critical of both US and Russian imperialism at the same time. That is true. For example, I'm critical of both. In fact, you should be. I agree. It is also possible to say that both are bad. That is true. Both of them are bad, though the US imperialism is far more far-reaching, far more destructive, not really in the same league, especially given the US's complete control of the global financial system. The next line, though, and acknowledge that Russian imperialism is worse. Wait, what? What? Okay, how is that the case? Let's read his justification. After all, both powers engage in foreign interventions. We're looking at kind of different scales here, right? Like Russia engages in foreign interventions, like for example in Syria, supporting rebels in Donbass and Crimea, and stuff like that, right? That's bad, for sure. They'd probably be better if they didn't do that. But saying that both powers engage in foreign interventions is just completely ignoring things like scale, motivations, overall destruction of said interventions. Like what the US does is not simply interventions. These are outright military invasions on the other side of the world. Now, in the US invasion of Iraq, started and maintained a war and an occupation of a sovereign country based on complete lies. There was no justification for it whatsoever. That resulted in the death of upwards of 500,000 people, possibly more than 1 million. Now, that alone is not just more than the potential death toll of every single Russian intervention since the end of the Cold War. It is also more than the potential death toll of every single Chinese intervention and Russian intervention combined. And we're just talking here about one intervention. One. Let me just cite a source for that Iraq death toll thing. The lowest confirmed estimates regarding actual confirmed, like identified bodies tied to an ID are around 200,000. Though that is a very, very low estimate because that requires actual positive identification. And that's not the sort of standard that's used for any sort of real total death estimate. For example, if you apply that to the Holocaust, there'd only be about 4 million or 4.5 million roughly positively identified victims, Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust. But we say there's 6 million because they haven't all been positively identified. There's 1.5 million who haven't. And that's after like 70 or 80 years of research trying to identify these victims. So to go with the low estimate here from the Iraq body count project, which is around 200,000, that's incredibly low. That's like the baseline, the absolute lowest possible estimate, but obviously there's far more than that. And the other estimates go from around 500,000 to around 1 million. And the 500,000 one, absolutely incontestable. That is the minimum that we're dealing with here. Otherwise, you're essentially engaging in complete denialism. And all of this was because of the US. This war wouldn't have happened without the US. They invaded a sovereign country for no reason whatsoever, no valid reason whatsoever. Murdered 500,000 people. Sovereign country, literally on the other side of the world. That's one intervention. In that one intervention, they have done far more harm than Russia has done in every single thing that it's done in the last 30 years, including all of its interventions, as bad as they are. And that's one. That's one. The US has done far more. In the 90s, it continued Guatemalan genocide. It's backed coups in Haiti. It's backed a coup in Honduras. It's invaded Afghanistan. It's bombed Libya. It's supported a war in Yemen that has easily killed at least 500,000 people. It still backs fascist dictatorships the world over. Look, I can go on here, okay? There's no comparison here. There's no comparison between these two at all. Russia is a regional power. It can, sort of bully its immediate neighbors. It can't do the sort of imperialism the USA does. It couldn't even hope to. Would it if it could? Yeah, probably, but it can't. So to say that Russia is worse is whitewashing US imperialism, and that's lying. It is a completely unsustainable notion to make. It's a lie. It's just plain a lie. And he goes on here to say, the US imperialism tends to happen through soft power. No, it doesn't. All those things that I just went over were not soft power. The USA operates with this tacit implication that it's always going to coup you, invade you, sanction you, etc. None of those things are soft power, okay? And his definition of soft power is capitalism, economic pressure, etc. That's not what soft power is. Soft power is things like cultural, like, spreading your culture, your ideas. It's not capitalism, economic pressure, etc. Economic pressure is hard power. Economic pressure is, trying to cause material harm to human beings. It's about as hard power as you can. It might be less direct than just shooting them, but it's absolutely not soft. Okay? Russian imperialism is more scorched earth, rolling in the tanks immediately after a country tries to drift away from their sphere of influence. That's what the US does too. Are you fucking with us? The US was allied with Saddam. Once Saddam, sort of went off the rails a little bit from what they wanted him to do, they roll in the tanks, twice in fact. So, what the fuck, man? And then his citations are very funny. See Hungary in 1956. That was the Soviet Union. That's literally a completely different state entity than the current, hyper-capitalist, oligarchical Russian state. Czechoslovakia in 1968. Again, that's the Soviet Union, dude. Like, we can just look at the last 20 years, and there's so much more than that from the US alone. He also said, for example, the US doesn't annex neighboring countries. 1/3 of the US territory was annexed from Mexico. And the US literally hard interferes in not just its immediate neighbors, it definitely interferes in Mexico, fucking ton, but everything south of Mexico too. I mean, the US is currently sanctioning fucking Cuba. It has been sanctioning it for 60 years. You know what else the US is sanctioning? What this guy calls soft power that factually murders people? Syria, Iran, Yemen, Afghanistan, Cuba, all right now. That's not a soft power, dude. That's literally like mobilizing the US's hegemonic imperial power, its hegemonic control over the global capitalist system to kill human beings in order to try and get back at their government. To whitewash that as just soft power is ludicrous. Russia could never hope to do anything like that, at least as powerful as it is now, which, let's be real, it's never going to control the global financial system like the US does. China maybe. Russia, no. Definitely not even close. So like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? The US doesn't roll in the tanks? What world do you live in? You want to know what the US did to its neighbors? Last 40 years or so, the US supported the coup in Bolivia, at least diplomatically. We don't yet know if they did it materially, though they've absolutely run diplomatic interference for the far-right fascist coup in Bolivia. 2009, they backed the coup in Honduras. They still back practically every far-right government in Latin America. They very recently forced the biggest loan in IMF history, a $60 billion loan onto Argentina. That's not soft power, by the way. That is trying to force a country into debt servitude in order to force so-called neoliberal structural adjustments on them. That's not soft power.
Communism is based
damaging human beings for your imperial capitalist ambitions, okay? It's not soft power. It's like calling fucking Russian influence in Ukraine, aside from just military invasion, soft power. That's not what soft power is, man. Like, he goes on to say, as bad as the US in many regards, its geopolitical enemies are far worse. No, they're not. Russia is an oligarchic autocracy. So is the USA. Do you think that the population of the US has any influence over their politics? Because they factually don't. The US is also run by oligarchs. It's an authoritarian police state, mass surveillance state. I mean, just today, the CIA was revealed as running a massive surveillance operation within the US. Everything that you think happens to the populations in terms of surveillance, in terms of control, in China and Russia happens to Americans too. And this guy's from Hungary too, so happens to him as well. And this is just what we know about. CIA mass surveillance program captured data from some American citizens. A secret CIA mass surveillance program captured personal data from at least some American citizens, according to a partly declassified letter. That's just according to a partly declassified letter. We don't really know much more, because it's all secret, isn't it? It's true that supporting geopolitical enemies of the US will not help bring about a leftist utopia, but saying that the US's geopolitical enemies are far worse is literally just completely wrong. The US is the #1 impediment to leftism worldwide. That is a simple fact. Anytime any government starts leaning to the left, I mean the actual left, not what this guy thinks is the left, like joining the fucking EU or something, or joining NATO. That's not what leftism is, my friend. Anytime that happens, the USA always is going to try to coerce you. It's going to try a number of things, like first it's going to try economic coercion, diplomatic coercion. If that doesn't work, if your government is resilient and survives that, it's going to try to either rig your elections or straight up overthrow you in a coup, or at least support a coup against you. That doesn't work, it's going to sanction you. That doesn't work, it's going to invade you. Or at least maybe in the past, not so much now. Like the US at least hasn't invaded Venezuela, thank God. But they were thinking about it for quite a while. So like to be like Russia and China are worse for the left in terms of geopolitics is just factually false. Russia and China don't really give a shit what ideology your government has as long as it does business with them. Or at least, you can argue that Russia does care about what kind of governments their border states have. As long as they are like aligned with Russia, they're okay with that. But in terms of actual like politics, they don't give a fucking shit, man. China definitely doesn't. China will work with anyone. Whether it's like a fascist country or like some fucking so-called Marxist-Leninist state. They don't give a shit. As long as you'll do business with them, they're fine with it. Like, China is a surveillance state, tech dystopia. You think you don't live in one of those? You think the US is in one of those? Since there is no third position, we choose the lesser of two evils. What does that mean? The only option is to choose the lesser of two evils? I mean, if that's the truth, which it's not, by the way, you don't build leftism by siding with a fucking imperialist power. That's because we, above 80 IQ, we do politics based on rationality. You're not doing politics based on rationality. You're doing politics based on siding with the world's global hegemonic imperialist power that does everything possible to destroy leftism the world over. Is that your way of building leftism? Like, if you were to choose based on the lesser evil, which you shouldn't, you would choose China. Out of these three, you would side with China geopolitically. Because, China's going to give you a loan. It's going to try to get something out of it. But at least it's not going to coup your government. At least it's not going to sanction you. As long as you stay in its good graces in terms of like not saying too much about its domestic affairs, it's not going to do that sort of shit to you. The US, man, you try to nationalize a couple of mines or something. Oh man, you're fucked. You're totally fucked. Do I need to go over the history of this? Is this guy really that ignorant that he needs me to go over it? Okay. Argentina 76, Chile 73, Bolivia in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Brazil 60s, 70s, 80s, Paraguay throughout that entire period as well, the counter-revolution in Peru, the US support of the Contras in Nicaragua, the US support of the Guatemalan genocide, the current US sanctioning of Afghanistan, after their their feigned concern for human rights there, and trying to intentionally starve their population to get back at the government. Current sanctions on Cuba. All of this is because they don't fall in line with what the US wants them to do. And because they are marginally leftist. Most of these countries that I just mentioned, like when this happened, when the US did this, they were not even really leftist at all. They were like minor, like center-left at most, and just because they were going against like the US's global capitalist order, it was too much for them. If you're going to ignore all of that and try to whitewash the US empire with the shit that he said here, then like, I'm sorry, man, but you're not a leftist. The way that you frame this is not leftist at all. It's campism. It's liberal campism. You side with the USA essentially based on aesthetics. You don't give a shit that it's the number one geopolitical bloc to any sort of remotely leftist, even sort of mildly social democratic movement, especially in the third world. Russia's not going to stop you from, it's not going to stop some random country in Asia or in Latin America from, implementing some social welfare programs because it's inconvenient for it economically. You know what country will do that? The USA. Constantly. Absolutely constantly. Maybe you could argue that Russia would do that if it had the same geopolitical, the same economic power, but it doesn't. It's never going to, not even close. So it's an invalid argument based on a fucking invalid hypothetical that makes no sense at all. We're talking about reality. And in reality, the US is worse. It's a simple fact. Due to everything that it's went over. I think it's really telling that like the way that people are chosen to have their political opinions diffused to a wide audience and that we are supposed to pay attention to them is essentially through big tech algorithms. Like big tech chose this guy's videos. The video that they chose was his one on Dubai or whatever. Big tech chose this guy's video right here to become very popular. Dubai is a parody of the 21st century. It was chosen by the YouTube algorithm to catapult his channel to popularity. Like a very short, sort of very relatively low-effort video, essentially just based on citing a bunch of stuff he found in the first couple of pages of Google regarding Dubai to state something that is very self-evident, that Dubai is a joke.
Communism is based...
So it's a funny video, I'm not knocking it in terms of its entertainment value, okay? It's a funny video. The stuff that he says are things that most people agree with. Elon Musk is an annoying idiot who's wrong about everything. True. Most people who aren't tech bros agree with that. Urbanism, high-density apartments, trains. Everyone agrees with that. Everyone with a brain, at least. It's very easy to get, blow up making videos like that. But the idea that we now need to pay this guy's geopolitical analysis any sort of heed or give it any sort of respect because the YouTube algorithm chose him to give a platform to, even though he quite clearly has no fucking clue what he's talking about, or at least is very willing to completely ignore reality in order to spread a support of what is essentially a fascism, because the USA is the world's #1 exporter of fascism, of genocide, of every single thing that is antithetical to leftism. So the idea that we have to give him some sort of credence based on that is insane. Like, his opinions are dog shit. His analysis is dog shit, and that this is how the world is now is honestly even worse than how it was before. I think we're kind of entering a singularity where intellectuals, as flawed as the idea of intellectuals has always been, as idiotic as most intellectuals have always been, is being replaced with who did the big tech algorithm choose to make them money. And I think that's honestly worse than how things were before. I think in this current environment, once the present generation of like sort of at least mildly dissenting voices like Zizek, Varoufakis, Chomsky are gone or fall off, the people who replace them are just going to be nowhere near on their level of analysis. Like, those people have flaws. They say lots of dumb shit themselves, aside from Zizek. He's always correct. But they are leagues better than these people. These people are just like random people with very little idea of what they're talking about, who are just partisan for the propaganda that they were fed their entire life, and who are essentially incapable of thinking past it. And they're going to be propped up as the next generation of like people who you need to pay attention to, people who are the important analysts or whatever. And that's bad. You know, how are we going to fight capitalism when the people who are supposedly the representatives of the left are people who think that the empire that upholds global capitalism needs our support? I think the future is very dire. You know, the people who say things other than this are not convenient to be raised up by the YouTube algorithm or other social media platform algorithms. So there's not going to be really anywhere near as much of a countercurrent against this. And Adam Something is just such an amazing example of that. I'm sorry, buddy. You make entertaining videos on other stuff, but you're just not a very smart or insightful person on geopolitics, regardless of how much you posture thinking that you are by citing maps from far-right tabloids that they made up on the spot.